You've hit ceilings before. You've done the work, learned the strategies, built the discipline, and yet there's this invisible wall that keeps you orbiting around the same level. No matter how much effort you push into the system, the output barely changes. That's not laziness, that's not lack of talent. That's your identity anchor. It's the internal definition of who you think you are, welded so tightly to your sense of normal that any result beyond it feels foreign. Every person who's ever made a real quantum leap, the kind that redefines their income, influence, health, or relationships, has faced this same internal gravity. They were pulled back, not by what they didn't know, but by what they kept believing about themselves. This isn't motivational fluff, it's mechanics. You act in line with who you believe you are. You can temporarily outperform your identity through willpower, but sooner or later, the system resets. You'll find subtle ways to return to familiar outcomes. That's what the mind does when your results threaten your self-concept. You've built a control system designed to preserve continuity. And that system's first law is simple. Never violate who I believe myself to be. You might call it self-sabotage, resistance or fear of success. But the real issue isn't fear, it's mismatch. You're trying to install a new reality on top of an outdated operating system. Every time you reach for something bigger, your current identity scans for inconsistencies. The moment it detects conflict, it activates defense protocols, procrastination, overthinking, rationalization, or fatigue. It doesn't want you to fail. It wants you to stay consistent. The human brain prizes stability over expansion. That's why transformation feels like chaos. It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because you're disrupting the anchor that's kept you safe. Now, here's the truth most people don't want to face. The anchor didn't appear by accident. It was forged through repetition, rewarded through belonging, and reinforced by your environment. Every success you've had, every failure you've endured, every label you've accepted layered another chain around the anchor. You became the sum of what got approval. You formed an identity around what kept you safe, admired, and predictable. That was necessary once, but at this stage, it's poison to progress. People talk about goals as if they exist outside of identity. They don't. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is an identity gap. When you try to make a quantum jump without upgrading the core definition of who you are, the system collapses. You start to lose energy, direction, and certainty. You tell yourself stories like, I need more discipline, or I just have to wait for the right time. When in reality, the issue isn't time or tactics, it's identity bandwidth. Your current self cannot sustain the frequency of your next level. You don't outwork your anchor, you outgrow it. But before you can do that, you have to see it. That's where this process begins. Throughout this journey, we'll break the illusion that keeps you playing small. We'll expose the invisible mechanics that govern your results, decode how identity is built, and give you the tools to re-engineer your self-concept so completely that quantum jumps become natural, not accidental. This isn't about surface motivation. It's about rewiring how you relate to yourself. Because every change in performance is preceded by a change in identity. You can't consistently act in opposition to who you believe you are. When you finally understand that, everything changes. You stop chasing outcomes and start upgrading the operator. That's when growth compounds. That's when the leaps start to stick. You'll begin by spotting the anchor, the specific identity script that's keeping your results predictable. We'll pull it out from the shadows, name it, and dissect how it formed. Then we'll move through the deeper mechanics of how personal leaps actually work. Not through hype, but through precision. You'll see how self-image operates like a thermostat, keeping you within a certain range of achievement no matter how high you aim. Then we'll go to work on mapping your current identity layer by layer. You'll uncover the stories, standards, and safeguards that define your behavioral limits. Once the map is visible, we'll reveal the hidden payoffs, the benefits you secretly collect by staying the same. You'll see how your mind trades growth for comfort, expansion for certainty, and ambition for belonging. Then we'll rebuild from the inside out. You'll draft your next identity in concrete behavioral terms, not vague affirmations. You'll create micro-proof, stack evidence, and install new capabilities that make the next version of you feel normal. Finally, you'll repattern the loop that sustains identity. You'll learn to engineer environments, habits, and relationships that reinforce your new self automatically. This is where transformation stops being effort and becomes architecture. And when that's done, we'll cross the event horizon, the moment where you can't return to who you were, because the structure of your reality no longer supports it. That's the real quantum jump, not just a burst of success, but a permanent shift in who you are. You're not broken, you're anchored. The goal is not to destroy your past identity, but to release the part that no longer serves your trajectory. When you do that, momentum stops being fragile. You'll stop asking how to stay consistent because you'll realize you've become someone for whom consistency is natural. The journey begins now with the first principle: awareness. If you can't spot the anchor, you can't cut it. Let's expose what's really keeping you tied to predictable outcomes and prepare the ground for your next quantum leap. The first step in breaking free is spotting the anchor. Most people never do this because they think change begins with motivation. It doesn't. Change begins with precision. Until you can define the identity pattern that governs your behavior, you'll keep mistaking symptoms for causes. Spotting the anchor is about brutal clarity. It's the moment you turn the microscope on yourself without distortion or justification. An identity anchor is not a belief you consciously hold. It's the emotional gravity that defines what's normal for you. It determines what kind of success feels deserved, what kind of struggle feels familiar, and what kind of behavior feels out of character. It's the baseline that regulates your results no matter how much you want to grow. These anchors form from three sources: reinforcement, resistance, and repetition. Reinforcement happens when an outcome validates who you think you are. If you see yourself as disciplined, every win that confirms that belief strengthens the anchor. Resistance forms when pain or shame attaches to a specific outcome. If failure once meant rejection, your mind builds protection protocols to avoid repeating that pain. Repetition hardwires both patterns into your nervous system until they feel like truth. That's how the anchor becomes invisible. It stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like reality. You can spot the anchor by studying your recurring patterns. Look for the goals you nearly achieve but never sustain. The moments you self-correct when success feels too easy. The emotional spikes that appear when you try to change too fast. These are not random, they're signs of identity resistance. The closer you get to breaking your ceiling, the stronger the anchor pulls. To diagnose it, analyze the friction points in your progress. Every area of your life operates under an identity algorithm. The algorithm rewards consistency with your self-concept and punishes deviation. If you see a recurring plateau, you're not hitting a tactical wall. You're hitting an identity boundary. Here's how to test it. Identify one area where growth feels forced. Then ask yourself, who would I need to stop being for this to be easy? The answer will expose the anchor. It might be the high achiever who equates rest with laziness, the people pleaser who fears losing approval, or the lone wolf who resists collaboration. Whatever form it takes, the anchor is not external. It's the internal loyalty contract you signed long ago. Once you spot it, resist the urge to attack it. Awareness without judgment is key. The goal isn't to destroy the anchor, but to understand why it exists. Every anchor was created to keep you safe. It's the mind's way of guaranteeing continuity in a world that constantly shifts. The paradox is that the very mechanism built for safety becomes the primary obstacle to expansion. Spotting the anchor also means confronting emotional inertia. Change threatens your sense of identity, and the nervous system interprets that threat as danger. That's why transformation feels like instability. But once you can observe that reaction without identifying with it, the grip loosens. You start seeing the anchor as a pattern, not a personality. Now that the anchor is visible, the next challenge is to understand the physics of change, the invisible mechanics that govern how identity either accelerates or resists evolution. Next, we will break down why growth isn't linear, why the self-image set point keeps pulling you back, and how to rewrite that control system to make your next quantum jump inevitable. Big transformations don't unfold in straight lines. They don't move from point A to point B in predictable increments. The kind of leap that redefines your life follows a pattern of pressure, resistance, collapse, and recalibration. This is where most people misunderstand growth. They think consistent action alone guarantees exponential results, but if the internal identity set point doesn't change, progress plateaus. You can't outperform the thermostat of your self-image. When your results exceed your current sense of normal, the identity system triggers an internal correction. It quietly brings you back to equilibrium. That's why someone can make a surge in business, relationships, or health, then mysteriously slide back to old levels. They didn't lose skill, they returned to identity alignment. To grasp this fully, you have to treat identity as a control system, not a collection of beliefs. Think of it as an autopilot. It constantly scans your environment and compares your behavior to what it considers normal. If your actions or outcomes drift too far from that internal baseline, it generates emotional tension, anxiety, guilt, or confusion to nudge you back within range. The system's job isn't to optimize you, it's to stabilize you. It was designed to protect the continuity of your self-definition. That's why leaps feel unnatural. They aren't just new experiences. They're violations of the identity code you've lived by. The physics of a personal leap begins with compounding tension. You accumulate insight, skill, and effort, and for a long stretch, nothing seems to move. This is the compression phase. The mind demands proof before it permits a new self-image. Every action you take that contradicts your current identity builds potential energy in the system. Then in one unpredictable moment, that energy converts into acceleration. To outsiders, it looks like an overnight success. In reality, it's the delayed release of years of stored identity tension, finally breaking the threshold of self-consistency. The leap happens when your sense of what's normal expands faster than your need for safety. This is why linear growth strategies fail for non-linear transformations. The next level doesn't require twice the effort. It requires a different internal calibration. If your identity still operates on the assumptions of your previous phase, the system interprets expansion as threat. It's the same reason lottery winners often lose their fortune, and people who lose massive weight sometimes regain it. The external change outran the internal upgrade. The self-image thermostat triggered a return to balance. You can observe this phenomenon in every domain. In business, it shows up as income volatility. Someone scales their revenue rapidly, then subconsciously engineers a setback. They take their foot off the gas, make poor hiring decisions, or lose interest. It's not random. Their nervous system equates higher income with increased exposure, responsibility, or judgment. The anchor pulls. In relationships, it appears when someone finally meets a healthy partner but feels off. Their identity, conditioned by chaos or unavailability, interprets peace as boredom. The gravitational pull of the familiar reasserts itself. In health, it's the athlete who can't stay injury-free, or the person who starts every diet strong and ends in guilt. Their subconscious isn't sabotaging, it's protecting consistency. The underlying principle is simple. The self-image set point regulates all performance. You can consciously set goals far beyond your current identity, but unless you elevate that internal standard, the subconscious will reinterpret every new condition through the old filter. You'll experience progress as instability. You'll mislabel expansion as danger. The anchor doesn't fight you openly. It whispers through logic. It says things like, slow down, be realistic, don't overdo it, or you've already done enough. It's not trying to ruin you. It's trying to maintain the status quo. Breaking through that set point demands a deliberate reframing of feedback loops. Every time you take an action that contradicts your old identity, you must pair it with immediate recognition. The mind needs evidence to justify new self-perception. Without that reinforcement, it reverts. That's why repetition alone isn't enough. You need conscious awareness during repetition. Otherwise, you'll repeat the same action, but store it under the same identity file. The leap doesn't come from new behavior alone. It comes from new meaning assigned to behavior. State shifts accelerate this process. When your physiology and psychology align toward expansion, your nervous system becomes receptive to new identity patterns. You've experienced it before, those moments when time slows, focus heightens, and everything feels inevitable. That's not luck. That's alignment. It's your system temporarily overriding old constraints. The goal is to stabilize that state long enough for your new identity to claim it as normal. Once that happens, the extraordinary becomes ordinary, and the jump locks in. Most people never reach that stabilization because they treat state as random. They wait for motivation instead of engineering energy. But energy is physics. Identity consumes or generates it depending on alignment. When your self-concept and your goals clash, the friction burns energy. When they align, energy compounds. This is why certain individuals seem tireless. They aren't superhuman. They're congruent. Their behavior matches their identity story, so they experience less internal drag. Another critical element in the physics of a leap is emotional velocity. Growth requires discomfort tolerance. The faster you can metabolize emotional turbulence, the faster you can integrate new levels of identity. People misinterpret emotional pain as a stop sign. It's actually a recalibration signal. The body is adjusting to a new gravitational pull. The sooner you normalize that discomfort, the smoother the ascent. Every quantum leap demands chaos tolerance. If you can't hold the volatility of expansion, you'll unconsciously seek contraction. Understanding this allows you to reframe resistance as progress. Resistance is proof the identity boundary is being stretched. The energy you feel when stepping outside your comfort zone isn't a warning. It's a confirmation that you're rewriting your set point. Growth hurts because it's neurological remodeling. Old neural pathways die, new ones form. The brain resists rewiring because familiarity equals survival. But when you sustain the new behavior long enough to prove safety, the system stops fighting and starts supporting. So how do you intentionally raise your self-image set point? Through calibrated evidence loops. Instead of chasing massive results, focus on small, undeniable proofs of the next identity. You must teach your nervous system that this new level of performance is not only possible, but safe. That's the purpose of controlled exposure, taking consistent incremental actions that stretch you without triggering shutdown. Over time, the brain internalizes this new pattern as the baseline. What once felt like a leap becomes your new normal. That's how the identity thermostat resets. The key is emotional neutrality. High performers often sabotage themselves because they attach too much emotional weight to results. The higher the emotional volatility, the harder it is to integrate the new identity. Real mastery looks calm from the outside because the individual has normalized intensity. They operate from a stable internal frequency while everything around them evolves. That's the secret to sustaining leaps. Your environment can shift dramatically, but your internal coherence remains unshaken. Understanding these mechanics also exposes why transformation feels lonely. When your identity expands faster than your social environment, you begin to outpace familiar dynamics. The people and contexts that reinforced your old self may unconsciously try to re-anchor you. They're not malicious, they're preserving their version of you. This is where many regress. They confuse belonging with alignment. The truth is, belonging to an outdated ecosystem is one of the fastest ways to reattach the anchor. Maintaining expansion sometimes requires temporary isolation until your new identity finds resonance. At its core, the physics of personal leaps teaches one thing: transformation is not about becoming someone else. It's about subtracting everything that distorts your potential. The leap doesn't create a new self. It reveals the self that's been hidden beneath accumulated programming. When you finally stop negotiating with your old identity, the system releases its grip. You stop oscillating between expansion and contraction. Your trajectory stabilizes upward. Growth isn't linear because identity isn't static. It evolves through friction, feedback, and fluid recalibration. Each surge and setback serves a purpose: to strengthen structural integrity for the next phase. The goal isn't to chase constant momentum, but to build the capacity to recover instantly when it breaks. That's how the elite operate. They don't avoid resistance. They metabolize it. They treat setbacks as proof they're operating near the boundary of the next quantum level. Once you understand this, you stop fearing the pullback. You start using it. Every time the old identity tries to correct you, that's your opportunity to reinforce the new narrative. You override the anchor through consistent contradiction, repeated action aligned with the identity you've chosen, not the one you inherited. Eventually, the feedback loops synchronize and the system stabilizes at a higher frequency. That's the moment the leap completes. It's not loud, not cinematic, it's silent, like gravity shifting direction. Next, we will turn the microscope inward and break your identity into tangible layers so you can see exactly what's running your life. Your story, your standards, your signals, and your safeguards. Identity is not a single construct. It's a layered architecture, each level reinforcing the others in a loop so seamless that most people mistake it for personality. To change who you are in practice, not just in theory, you have to map those layers with precision. Without that map, you're rearranging symptoms while the system remains untouched. You don't evolve by forcing behavior. You evolve by upgrading the blueprint that behavior comes from. Every thought, habit, and emotional response you repeat is anchored to a self-model, an internal code that determines what kind of outcomes feel normal. To shift your results permanently, you must expose that code and rewrite it consciously. The 4 layers of identity are story, standards, signals, and safeguards. They operate like an interconnected circuit. Your story tells you who you are. Your standards dictate what you will or won't tolerate. Your signals are the behaviors that broadcast that story to yourself and others. And your safeguards are the mechanisms that protect that identity from disruption. When people say they want change, but keep circling back to old results, it's because their story hasn't changed. Their standards aren't enforced, their signals are inconsistent, and their safeguards are working against them. The first layer, story, is the most powerful because it frames every interpretation. Your story isn't the events of your life. It's the meaning you attach to those events. It's the narrative that makes sense of your past and predicts your future. When you say, "I'm the kind of person who," you're revealing the code. That sentence is the entry point into your identity architecture. Most people's stories were written unconsciously by parents, teachers, culture, and past failures. They rarely update the script, so they keep acting out an outdated narrative while craving new results. Until you rewrite that story, every strategy sits on unstable ground. Mapping your story requires ruthless honesty. You must catch the invisible language patterns that keep the past alive. Phrases like, "That's just how I am," or "I've always struggled with," are evidence of story-level identity. They sound factual, but they're declarations. They lock you into continuity with a past that no longer serves your potential. The truth is, identity stories are optional frameworks, not laws. The moment you treat them as flexible, your future starts to unhook from your history. The second layer, standards, is where your story becomes operational. Your standards are the unspoken rules that regulate your daily behavior. They're not goals, they're thresholds. A goal says, "I want to be fit." A standard says, "I don't skip training." A goal says, "I want financial freedom." A standard says, "I don't spend impulsively." Standards define your real identity because they represent your minimum acceptable level of behavior. When your results don't change, it's not because you lack ambition, it's because your standards haven't moved. To map your standards, look at your daily friction points. Every recurring frustration reveals a boundary you've tolerated too long. If you constantly feel drained by disorganization, your standard for structure is too low. If you keep ending up in one-sided relationships, your standard for reciprocity is underdeveloped. Raising a standard isn't about becoming perfect. It's about removing permission for mediocrity. Once a new standard becomes habitual, your environment and outcomes adjust automatically. Standards signal to the world what kind of equilibrium you maintain. The third layer, signals, is the visible manifestation of your identity. They're the cues you send through behavior, tone, and attention. They tell your nervous system what's real. When you repeatedly behave below your standards, you send conflicting signals to your subconscious. It interprets inconsistency as proof that the old story still holds power. That's why temporary bursts of discipline rarely create transformation. They don't generate enough consistent signals to override the past. You can use this layer deliberately. Every action either reinforces your current identity or installs the next one. When you act in alignment with the future self you've defined, even in small ways, your brain starts collecting evidence that you are that person. Over time, the signal becomes dominant. The key is consistency. Sporadic excellence can't rewrite identity. Steady congruence can. The most powerful signals are the ones you think no one sees. How you treat your time, your attention, and your internal dialogue when no one's watching. The fourth layer, safeguards, is what keeps everything locked in place. Safeguards are the defense mechanisms that preserve your current identity. They include your habits, your peer group, your environment, and even your rationalizations. They're not inherently negative. In fact, they once protected you. But when your safeguards start preventing expansion, they turn from armor into chains. For example, perfectionism can safeguard you from criticism, but block you from momentum. Humility can safeguard you from arrogance, but limit your expression. Comfort can safeguard you from burnout, but trap you in stagnation. To evolve, you have to replace old safeguards with new ones designed for your next level. Mapping your safeguards means identifying which ones serve and which ones suppress. Ask yourself, what behaviors or conditions do I use to feel safe? Then question whether those same behaviors restrict growth. The mind prioritizes familiarity over excellence. It confuses safe with sustainable. That's why transformation feels unstable. It's the process of installing new safety mechanisms that support a higher baseline. When your new safeguards are aligned with your desired identity, expansion stops feeling like threat and starts feeling like stability. To map all four layers in practice, start by creating a belief inventory. List every statement you say about yourself regularly. Be literal. Every I am, I can't, or I always reveals story-level data. Then conduct a language audit. Review how you describe effort, success, and failure. The words you choose show whether your story is written from power or from limitation. Replace passive language with ownership language. I have to becomes I choose to. I can't becomes I don't yet know how. The brain rewires identity through language long before behavior catches up. Next, create your recurring limits timeline. Write down the goals or situations that keep repeating with the same outcome. These are identity fingerprints. If you repeatedly earn at the same income level, attract the same kind of people, or lose momentum after a set period, you're seeing your identity's upper limit in action. Patterns that survive across seasons aren't circumstantial. They're structural. Once your map is visible, reduce it to a single page. Write your dominant story in one paragraph. Under it, list your 5 current standards, your 5 strongest signals, and your 5 most active safeguards. This becomes your identity map. Seeing it in black and white does more than clarify, it demystifies. You realize that the self you've been defending is an algorithm, not a destiny. And any algorithm can be rewritten. The real power of this process is detachment. When you can observe your identity as a map instead of as a self, you create distance between awareness and pattern. That space is where transformation begins. Without it, every attempt at change feels personal. You think you're fixing yourself when you're really just debugging code. The emotional charge drops the moment you recognize that identity isn't who you are, it's who you've been rehearsing. Once your map is laid out, you'll notice something crucial. The anchor isn't random. It's located precisely where these layers intersect. Your story defends it, your standards normalize it, your signals express it, and your safeguards protect it. That's why surface-level hacks never work. They address only one layer at a time. Real transformation rewires the system across all four. This mapping process isn't about judgment. It's about precision. You're not labeling your current identity as wrong. You're making it visible so you can update it. When you look at your life as the predictable expression of your current code, you stop blaming circumstance and start engineering cause. You gain control not by fighting yourself, but by understanding your own mechanics. With your identity map in hand, you can finally perform the most difficult and liberating step, uncovering why the anchor exists in the first place. Because no matter how frustrating it feels, it's been protecting something important. Next, we will expose the hidden payoffs that keep you tethered to your old identity and show you how to release them without losing the sense of safety that's kept you grounded for so long. Every limitation hides a reward. That's the paradox no one wants to acknowledge. The behaviors, beliefs, and fears you call self-sabotage are not random, they're loyalty mechanisms. They exist because, at some point, they paid you. The identity anchor you're trying to release has been buying you emotional safety in exchange for potential. Until you understand the payoff, you can't cut the contract. You'll keep protecting the very identity that's keeping you small. Growth doesn't stall because you lack strategy. It stalls because your subconscious is still collecting benefits from staying the same. The mind runs on incentive. Every habit is a trade. Comfort for progress, control for possibility, belonging for authenticity. When people try to force transformation through sheer will, they overlook the quiet accounting system beneath behavior. That system evaluates every decision based on perceived gain and loss, not conscious logic. You might want freedom, but if your current identity equates freedom with isolation, it will sabotage the attempt. You might crave recognition, but if recognition once brought criticism, you'll unconsciously avoid exposure. The problem isn't resistance, it's unexamined reward. To see this clearly, you have to strip emotion from the analysis. The anchor isn't your enemy. It's a security feature that's been running too long. It was installed when your nervous system linked certain experiences with survival. Maybe it was approval from authority, control in chaos, or the certainty of being right. Over time, that pattern became profitable. Every time the world felt uncertain, the identity anchor delivered a dividend: safety, validation, or predictability. It didn't care about potential. It cared about continuity. There are four primary categories of payoff: belonging, safety, righteousness, and simplicity. Each one offers comfort while quietly limiting expansion. Belonging payoffs revolve around acceptance. They keep you aligned with a tribe, ideology, or relationship that defines your sense of self. If your identity is fused with belonging, growth feels like betrayal. The thought of outgrowing your circle triggers guilt, not because you fear failure, but because you fear disconnection. The subconscious whispers, if I change too much, I'll lose them. So you slow your pace, dim your intensity, and settle for congruence over evolution. Belonging payoffs often disguise themselves as loyalty, but loyalty to stagnation is self-rejection in slow motion. Safety payoffs are rooted in control. They appear as routines, limits, and predictability. The safety-driven identity seeks certainty even at the cost of progress. It's the voice that says, I just need stability, when stability really means, I don't want to face uncertainty. This payoff is powerful because it masquerades as wisdom. It convinces you that caution is maturity, But growth is never safe. Expansion always involves risk, emotional, social, or financial. Until you redefine safety as internal stability rather than external predictability, your anchor will keep you grounded under the label of being responsible. Righteousness payoffs come from the ego's addiction to being right. This is the anchor that hides behind pride, resentment, and moral certainty. When your identity is built on being the one who knows, growth feels like humiliation. You cling to outdated opinions and reject new information because admitting change means admitting you were once wrong. The righteous identity sacrifices evolution for self-image. It would rather stay small and correct than expand and uncertain. To outgrow this, you have to trade the need to be right for the desire to be real. Simplicity payoffs are subtler. They're about reducing cognitive load. The brain loves patterns that save energy. Every familiar identity allows you to operate on autopilot, conserving mental bandwidth. The problem is that the same efficiency that once helped you survive now limits your capacity. Complexity, the kind that comes with growth, feels exhausting because it demands new processing power. Simplicity payoffs whisper, keep it manageable. Don't overcomplicate it. Stick with what works. Those statements sound rational, but they cap your expansion by preventing you from developing the mental range that the next level requires. Once you've identified which payoff dominates your anchor, you can perform the cost-benefit reckoning. Write down exactly what the anchor gives you and what it costs you. Quantify it in emotional and practical terms. If belonging keeps you safe, but also keeps you broke or unseen, write that. If safety keeps you calm but bored, note it. The moment you assign values to both sides, clarity emerges. Most people never grow because they treat comfort as priceless and potential as optional. When you see the real math, the illusion breaks. This reckoning isn't about guilt. It's about responsibility. Every payoff you've collected was a smart decision at some point. The child who learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict was resourceful. The young professional who overworked to earn approval was strategic. Those adaptations were intelligent responses to an environment that demanded them. The issue is not that they exist. It's that you kept running them long after the environment changed. Growth means updating your reward system to match your current reality. The most effective way to do this is through a process called the payoff swap. You don't break habits by removing their benefits. You replace those benefits with upgraded alternatives. If your anchor gives you belonging, design new communities aligned with your evolution. If it gives you safety, build financial, emotional, or relational stability that doesn't require self-suppression. If it gives you righteousness, cultivate curiosity as a higher form of certainty, the certainty that you can learn anything. If it gives you simplicity, create systems that automate complexity rather than avoid it. You're not abandoning reward. You're renegotiating it. This swap has to be embodied, not theoretical. The subconscious doesn't understand philosophy. It understands pattern. That means you must demonstrate the new payoff repeatedly until it feels normal. If your identity once equated peace with passivity, show your nervous system that assertiveness can coexist with calm. If it equated visibility with danger, show it that exposure brings opportunity. The goal is to prove through experience that the new payoff is safer and richer than the old one. Once the system believes that, resistance collapses. There's another hidden dimension to this process: grief. Releasing an identity anchor often feels like loss. You're saying goodbye to a version of yourself that protected you. Even if that version kept you limited, it also kept you alive, accepted, and sane during earlier chapters. Ignoring that emotional truth creates backlash. You'll unconsciously reinstall the anchor to avoid the emptiness that follows release. Honor the identity for what it gave you, then retire it with respect. Growth doesn't mean disowning your past selves. It means integrating them. When the payoff swap starts to settle, you'll notice something subtle. The same behaviors that once felt heavy start to feel neutral. You stop forcing change, and start maintaining new standards with ease. That's the point where the anchor dissolves. You no longer need to fight yourself because the internal economy has been recalibrated. You've changed the reward structure of your identity. The mind now sees expansion as safety, not threat. The deeper purpose of revealing these hidden payoffs isn't to eliminate them, but to become conscious of them. Awareness turns unconscious transactions into deliberate choices. You stop being manipulated by invisible contracts and start negotiating on your own terms. That's true autonomy, the ability to choose your emotional economy instead of inheriting it. By now, you've exposed the logic of the anchor and reclaimed authority over the incentives that once controlled you. But awareness alone isn't transformation. You've cleared the old framework. Now you need to design the new one. Next, we will construct the next identity, the version of you that operates from power, not protection, and performs at the level your future requires. The future won't meet you halfway. It waits at the level of identity you're willing to inhabit, not the goals you wish you could reach. You can't pull a quantum jump toward you while standing inside the mindset that resists it. To reach the next tier, you must draft the version of yourself who already lives there, not as fantasy, but as blueprint. The difference between those who transform permanently and those who relapse is structure. The ones who stay evolved don't chase inspiration. They build an identity framework that makes success inevitable. The first step is to define your post-jump self in behaviors, not adjectives. Words like confident, disciplined, or successful are empty until you translate them into daily action. If you say you want to be confident, specify what that looks like: speaking decisively, maintaining posture under pressure, setting boundaries without apology. If you want to be disciplined, define it through behavior, completing deep work before checking messages, training even when energy is low, controlling inputs that dilute focus. A well-drafted identity is behavioral, not emotional. The emotion follows the evidence. Begin by writing a clear statement. I am the kind of person who stulm. Fill in the blank with tangible, observable behavior. Each statement becomes a behavioral law for your new identity. The goal isn't perfection, it's consistency. Every repetition of that behavior is a vote cast for the future you. When enough votes accumulate, the system updates. Your mind stops arguing with the new narrative because the evidence is undeniable. The mistake most people make is waiting to feel different before acting differently. Identity flips when you act into a new self long enough for your emotions to catch up. Once your behavioral foundation is written, the next move is to identify your keystone capabilities. These are the skills or habits that, when mastered, automatically elevate every other part of your life. For example, emotional regulation amplifies leadership, communication, and decision-making. Focus control enhances productivity, creativity, and fulfillment. Physical discipline supports mental clarity and confidence. The post-jump self doesn't chase everything. It masters the few levers that compound across domains. To find your keystone capabilities, ask what behaviors, if improved, would make everything else easier or irrelevant. The answer reveals leverage. Then design your environment around that leverage. If focus is your keystone, eliminate friction that fractures attention. If communication is your keystone, study clarity and feedback daily. When your identity revolves around a core skill rather than a scattered set of goals, progress compounds geometrically. After keystones come micro-proofs, the small, irrefutable wins that signal to your nervous system that you are becoming this person. Big goals are too abstract for the subconscious to validate. Micro-proofs bridge that gap. Each time you honor a promise, even a small one, the brain updates the story. This is who I am now. The most effective transformations are built on micro-proof consistency. It's not about the size of the win, but the frequency of reinforcement. Micro-proofs must be tracked. Keep a visible record of every aligned action you take. This isn't vanity, it's identity evidence. The more evidence you collect, the less resistance you feel. The mind can argue with intention, but not with data. Over weeks and months, your new self-concept hardens into fact. You begin to expect excellence instead of hoping for it. That expectation is the mark of a stabilized identity. Now, to ensure the new identity is sustainable, you need constraints, values, guardrails that prevent overcorrection. Without them, growth mutates into distortion. Many high achievers reinvent themselves so aggressively that they lose grounding. They trade one imbalance for another. Constraints keep expansion clean. They act as ethical and emotional boundaries that maintain integrity while you scale. Start by identifying your non-negotiable values. What principles define how you operate, regardless of outcome? Examples might include truth, mastery, contribution, or autonomy. These are not slogans, they're filters. Every new behavior, opportunity, or relationship must align with them. If your new identity violates your core values, you'll experience friction disguised as fatigue. That's your integrity alarm warning you that growth has veered into distortion. Real transformation is never self-betrayal in disguise. To enforce these guardrails, create rules of alignment. If autonomy is a core value, you don't commit to projects that trap you in dependence. If mastery is a value, you don't chase volume over depth. If contribution matters, you don't pursue success that isolates you. These rules aren't restrictions. They're calibration tools. They ensure that the more powerful you become, the more coherent you remain. Without guardrails, power corrodes character. With them, it amplifies it. As you embody the post-jump self, expect dissonance. The old identity won't vanish quietly. You'll feel internal tension as the nervous system recalibrates. That discomfort isn't a sign of failure, it's proof of reprogramming. Each time you act differently despite resistance, you weaken the neural pathways that supported the past. Over time, the dissonance fades and ease replaces effort. The key is to interpret friction correctly. It's not the universe testing you. It's your brain updating its reference points. Another powerful accelerator is visualization, not of outcomes, but of identity execution. Don't picture the goal, picture the behavior. Visualize yourself operating as the post-jump self in real situations, negotiating calmly, training consistently, speaking with conviction. The subconscious can't distinguish vividly imagined experiences from real ones. Every repetition reinforces the neural wiring of the new identity. Visualization combined with microproof creates rapid convergence between intention and embodiment. The next layer is narrative coherence. You must build a story that connects your past to your future in a way that empowers both. The biggest reason people relapse after transformation is identity whiplash. They feel disconnected from their history. They see their old self as an enemy instead of a foundation. The post-jump self isn't a replacement. It's an evolution. Write a story where your past struggles were necessary training for your current power. This reframe allows the subconscious to integrate the new identity without resistance. The moment your mind believes the leap is a continuation, not a contradiction, the change locks in. To sustain the transformation, integrate social proof. Surround yourself with people who reinforce your new identity instead of mirroring your old one. Your environment acts as a feedback amplifier. Every interaction either validates or erodes the self-concept you're building. Cure it relentlessly. The post-jump identity thrives in ecosystems of challenge and congruence. If your circle doesn't reflect your next level, your environment becomes gravity. Choose resonance over history. There's one more non-negotiable factor: self-trust. You can't maintain an evolved identity if you doubt your own word. Every broken promise to yourself is a vote for the old version. Every honored commitment, no matter how small, strengthens the new one. Self-trust is built through repetition, not emotion. You keep your word until your nervous system accepts reliability as your default. Once that happens, uncertainty loses its power over you. Drafting your next identity isn't about pretending to be someone new. It's about codifying the version of you that's been trying to emerge. You're not inventing, you're formalizing. When your behaviors, values, and environment align around that structure, the transformation becomes irreversible. The new identity doesn't require maintenance, it maintains you. At this point, the blueprint of your post-jump self is clear, the behaviors are codified, and the framework is live. But drafting alone isn't enough. The next challenge is to rewire the evidence loops that sustain identity itself. Because even the most powerful self-concept will collapse if the brain keeps referencing outdated proof. Next, we will rebuild your evidence loop, so that every action, relationship, and environment reinforces the reality of who you've become instead of who you were. Identity only stabilizes when the evidence matches the story. You can design the most powerful version of yourself on paper, but if your environment, routines, and feedback loops still validate the old identity, the system will reject the upgrade. The subconscious doesn't care about vision boards or affirmations. It believes what it can verify. Transformation collapses when proof doesn't support the narrative. To make the new identity real, you have to repattern the evidence loop, the ongoing cycle of behavior, feedback, and interpretation that tells your brain who you are. The first rule of evidence is irreversibility. Temporary action doesn't convince the mind. Permanent proof does. You have to make small, deliberate moves that close the escape hatch back to the old self. These aren't reckless leaps, they're calibrated commitments. They might include ending a draining pattern, setting a boundary that can't be undone, changing your schedule so old habits no longer fit, or reconfiguring your environment to make regression inconvenient. Every irreversible commitment sends a message to your subconscious. The old version is no longer operational. Identity changes when the evidence becomes undeniable. Each irreversible action removes an argument from your mind's defense of the past. But these actions have to be small enough to be sustainable. Massive symbolic gestures, burning bridges, quitting everything, can trigger survival panic. The brain reads that as danger, not transformation. True repatterning relies on consistent, manageable proof that redefines normal without destabilizing safety. The next factor is social mirrors. Human identity is relational. You see yourself reflected in others' reactions. If you've built relationships around your old identity, those people will unconsciously signal you to stay consistent with who they remember. The subtle feedback, a raised eyebrow, a doubtful tone, a familiar nickname, reinforces the old pattern. To rewrite identity, you need mirrors that reflect your new frequency. That doesn't mean abandoning everyone from your past. It means curating exposure. Spend more time around those who respond to your potential instead of your history. When your social feedback aligns with your desired self-image, the change accelerates. Repatterning also demands environmental engineering. The brain is a prediction machine. It uses cues from your surroundings to determine what behaviors fit. If your environment still cues old habits, you'll unconsciously act them out. Rearranging your physical and digital space isn't superficial, it's strategic. Replace symbols of stagnation with triggers of growth. Remove reminders of procrastination, clutter, and past limitations. Install cues that make the new behaviors effortless. Visible workout gear, a clean workspace, a focused morning routine. The environment should constantly whisper, "This is who we are now." Another critical aspect is timing, the 90-day window of neural reprogramming. Studies show that repeated behavior sustained over roughly 3 months rewires the brain's default pathways. You can use this as a deliberate design cycle. Pick one identity domain to reinforce: health, discipline, influence, or creativity, and commit to a focused 90-day sprint. Treat it like a software update. During that period, track your evidence daily. Each successful repetition adds a data point in favor of your new identity. By the end of the cycle, the neural circuitry supporting your old behavior has weakened and the new one has taken root. To sustain this process, build a feedback protocol. Every week, review what reinforced your new identity and what contradicted it. This keeps the transformation conscious. Without reflection, your system will unconsciously revert to efficiency and default to old patterns. The key question isn't did I succeed, but what version of me showed up this week? Evaluate performance through the lens of identity expression rather than outcome. The goal is congruence, not perfection. The evidence loop also includes emotional regulation. Transformation is emotionally volatile. You'll experience spikes of pride, doubt, fear, and fatigue. Most people misinterpret emotional turbulence as a sign of failure, but it's just feedback from the nervous system adapting to a new operating level. To repattern effectively, you must learn to stabilize during those swings. When old emotions resurface, shame, guilt, frustration, observe them as residual data from your past self. Don't resist them, process them. The quicker you metabolize emotional turbulence, the faster your system integrates the upgrade. You also need deliberate rituals that mark progress. The brain encodes meaning through ritual. Celebrate milestones not as reward, but as reinforcement. Each acknowledgement tells your system, this is real, this is normal. Rituals might be journaling at the end of each 90-day cycle, reviewing progress publicly, or setting aside time to reflect in solitude. What matters is repetition and sincerity. The more you reinforce growth emotionally, the deeper it embeds neurologically. Repatterning is also about information control. The inputs you consume form part of your identity evidence. Every piece of content, conversation, and idea reinforces either your old or new worldview. Be selective. If your next-level identity values clarity and excellence, stop feeding your brain distraction and noise. You're at what you read, watch, and listen to. Your information diet is as crucial as your nutrition. Garbage in, identity out. As you rebuild your evidence loop, you'll encounter turbulence, moments when regression seems inevitable. These aren't setbacks, they're stress tests. Every identity upgrade triggers what can be called stability checks. The old patterns will attempt to reassert dominance just to confirm whether the new identity can hold under pressure. It's not sabotage, it's calibration. The key is to respond as the new version, not the old one. When you handle adversity in a way your past self wouldn't, the brain logs it as definitive proof of transformation. Regression is only dangerous when misinterpreted. Most people relapse because they assume the reappearance of old patterns means failure. In reality, it means the system is reconsolidating. Every time you recover faster, you weaken the old neural network further. Consistency after disruption is the ultimate evidence of mastery. The goal isn't to never fall back, it's to bounce back instantly without identity damage. Once your evidence loop stabilizes, you'll notice a new phenomenon: effortlessness. Behaviors that once felt forced become automatic. You no longer have to motivate yourself because the system now recognizes them as native. This is the point where growth becomes maintenance, where you stop chasing and start embodying. The external world begins to mirror the new internal configuration. Opportunities align, relationships shift, and performance feels natural. You're no longer forcing the leap, you're living from it. The final stage of repatterning is redundancy elimination. Identify any rituals or tools that were useful during transition but are now obsolete. The purpose of practice is permanence. Once a behavior or mindset has integrated, remove the scaffolding. Holding onto training wheels signals to your brain that you're not stable yet. Simplify your routines until only essentials remain. That minimalism is a declaration. This is who I am now. Repatterning the evidence loop transforms identity from an abstract concept into a closed system of reinforcement. Every action generates proof. Every proof strengthens belief. Every belief drives further action. At that point, transformation sustains itself. You no longer rely on motivation because the loop is self-fueling. By now, your system has been rebuilt behaviorally, emotionally, and environmentally. The anchor that once kept you tethered has lost its pull. You're ready for the final leap. The irreversible crossing from the version of you that tries to change into the one who simply operates at a new level of being. Next, we will step across that event horizon, locking the new identity in place and ensuring that the transformation not only lasts, but becomes the foundation for every future leap you take. There's a point in transformation where return becomes impossible. You reach a threshold where the cost of staying the same outweighs every comfort the old identity ever gave you. That's the event horizon, the crossing where you stop chasing change and start existing as the person who already embodies it. Every system in nature resists irreversible transformation because it threatens stability. But once you cross, the old reality collapses behind you. It's not about motivation anymore. It's about mechanics. You've restructured your internal architecture so completely that regression no longer fits your operating system. Crossing the event horizon begins with a visible break. You must orchestrate a clear, tangible moment that separates your old self from the new one. This is not symbolic fluff. It's psychological closure. The mind needs evidence of finality. That could mean ending a pattern, changing an environment, or making a commitment that defines your new trajectory. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that it's irreversible. When you draw that line and enforce it, your nervous system receives a clear message. There's no way back. That certainty stabilizes momentum. After the break, you'll feel disorientation. The old identity dissolves faster than the new one fully settles. This in-between state, what some call the identity void, is uncomfortable but essential. It's the space where integration happens. You're not lost. You're unanchored. The old map no longer applies, and the new one is still being written through action. Don't rush to fill the void. Most people sabotage transformation here by grasping for quick validation. They crave confirmation from others, proof of success, or a sense of familiarity. But the void is the incubation chamber for your new baseline. Stability will return, but only after you stop negotiating with the past. To make the crossing permanent, you need metrics that confirm the leap has stuck. Subjective feeling isn't enough. The mind's primary function is to distort perception in favor of safety, so you must quantify change. Use two categories of metrics: lag indicators and lead indicators. Lag indicators are the visible results: income, fitness, influence, quality of relationships. They prove the outcome. Lead indicators are the identity expressions: habits, boundaries, focus, speech patterns. They prove the embodiment. Most people obsess over lag and ignore lead, but identity stabilizes through lead indicators first. When your daily behavior aligns consistently with your next-level self, lag indicators catch up automatically. Audit your identity through this dual lens weekly. Ask yourself, did I act as the new version today? Did I make decisions from power or protection? Am I reinforcing the identity or reminiscing about the one I left behind? These questions recalibrate focus. Growth after the leap isn't about more, it's about precision. The difference between expansion and collapse is self-awareness. Maintenance is where most transformations die. People believe that once they've changed, they can coast. But evolution doesn't pause. It compounds or decays. The key to maintaining a quantum jump is periodic anchor checks. Even after you've crossed the event horizon, identity creep can occur. Old behaviors resurface subtly, disguised as logic or comfort. Schedule deliberate identity audits every few months. Review your map, your payoffs, your standards, and your evidence loops. Ask them what feels heavy again. Where am I negotiating? These questions expose micro-anchors before they turn into chains. Another layer of maintenance is environment calibration. As you evolve, your context must evolve with you. Spaces, systems, and people that supported your last jump may not support the next one. Growth demands environmental elasticity. Audit your surroundings the same way you audit your behaviors. Are your daily cues reinforcing expansion or nostalgia? Are you surrounded by people who challenge you to stay sharp, or those who remind you of who you used to be? The easiest way to fall backward is to keep revisiting rooms built for your previous self. The easiest way to stay forward is to keep designing environments that make the new self automatic. One of the highest levels of maintenance is contribution. When you teach what you've integrated, the identity solidifies. Sharing doesn't mean preaching, it means demonstrating mastery through service. When you help others cross their own thresholds, your new identity gains permanence. It's no longer just about personal validation. It's about creating ripple effects that mirror your evolution. Contribution shifts your focus from self-preservation to impact, which naturally keeps the system expanding. As you settle into the new reality, watch for subtle traps. The first is complacency. Comfort whispers that you've made it, that the work is done. But mastery is never static. The moment you stop upgrading, decay begins. The second trap is ego inflation. Success can convince you that the transformation was luck or that you're now untouchable. Both illusions are dangerous. Humility keeps the system adaptive. The goal isn't to become someone superior, it's to become someone congruent. You don't evolve to prove worth. You evolve to align potential with performance. Crossing the event horizon also redefines failure. In the old paradigm, failure felt personal. It questioned your ability or value. In the new paradigm, failure becomes diagnostic. It's simply feedback from the system. Every breakdown highlights a configuration error that can be corrected. That neutrality is liberation. You stop fearing setbacks because you recognize them as calibration. The more emotionally detached you become from outcome fluctuations, the faster you stabilize. Eventually, you'll notice that growth stops feeling dramatic. The leaps that once shook your reality become ordinary. That's the real marker of transformation, when extraordinary performance feels like baseline. You've transcended the need for external confirmation. Your validation loop has internalized. You're no longer chasing momentum. You are momentum. At this stage, the final discipline is readiness. Every leap plants the seed for the next. The human system doesn't stop evolving. Once you've stabilized one identity, another potential version begins to whisper. The goal is to stay available, to keep your system fluid enough for the next quantum shift when it calls. You maintain readiness by staying curious, staying uncomfortable, and staying honest. Stagnation happens not when growth stops, but when awareness stops. Crossing and maintaining the event horizon transforms not just performance, but perception. You begin to see reality through the lens of agency instead of fate. You stop identifying as someone who's changing and start identifying as someone who changes things. You recognize that the anchor was never an enemy, it was training. Every limitation that once frustrated you was preparation for handling power without losing integrity. Now, standing on the other side, you realize the journey was never about achievement. It was about alignment, about syncing who you are with what you're capable of. The real quantum jump isn't a single event. It's the lifelong practice of expansion without regression. You've learned to spot the anchor, understand the physics, map the self, expose the payoffs, draft the new identity, repattern the evidence, and cross the threshold. From here forward, every leap will feel less like effort and more like inevitability. You've cut the anchor. You've stabilized the leap. The next horizon waits, not as a dream, but as a decision.